Russian ballistic missiles shower President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown on Monday, as Russia accuses Ukraine of bombing the occupied city of Donetsk.
A West African bloc gives Niger's coup leaders an ultimatum: restore the president or face the consequences.
Russian ballistic missiles have slammed into an apartment complex and a university building in President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown, killing at least 6 people, including a 10-year-old girl and her mother. About 75 others have been wounded as rescuers continue their search for residents trapped beneath the rubble. The attack happened a day after the president warned fighting was drawing closer to Russian land, but it's not clear whether the strikes were in retaliation for his comments. In Donetsk, vehicles burned with dead bodies inside. Russia has accused Ukraine of killing 2 civilians and wounding others in the bombing of the Moscow-controlled city. Neither side's claims could be independently verified. A recent Ukrainian counter-offensive intensified last week. Drone attacks on Russia and Moscow-annexed territory, especially Crimea, have become more frequent. Russia has tightened security in the aftermath of such attacks. Some 800 mostly Russian passengers on board a cruise ship were met with protests as their boat arrived in the Georgian Black Sea port of Batumi early on Friday. Hundreds of students, members of opposition parties and activists gathered at the port holding signs denouncing Russia's war in Ukraine. At least 29 people were arrested. According to Russian state-owned media, the agency that runs the cruise ship says its boats will no longer dock in the Georgian port.
Eastern Poland's ancient forests, a traditional tourist destination now bristling with military hardware. Tensions have been ramped up since Russia's mercenary Wagner group moved into neighbouring Belarus.
Państwo polskie podjęło decyzję o budowie zapory wzdłuż całej granicy z Białorusią i ta zapora jest ciągle rozbudowywana i wzmacniana, jest uszczelniana w ten sposób nasza granica. Mamy także zwiększoną obecność Wojsko-Polskiej Straży Granicznej, tak żeby zamanifestować naszą sprawność oraz gotowość ewentualnej obrony, ale mam nadzieję, że do tego nie dojdzie. Jesteśmy członkiem Paktu Północnoatlantyckiego, mamy że na terenie państwa także wojska sojusznicze.
The Ministry of Defence says in addition to the newly organised military unit in Kolno, Poland is also reinforcing Griovo, Szymczyce and Czerwony Bor. While Poland is arming itself against possible provocations from Wagner's side, tourists are changing their holiday plans as a precaution, with some tourism businesses saying visitor numbers have halved.
To nie jest siła, która generalnie może wygenerować jakieś realne niebezpieczeństwo na tym terenie. Natomiast jest to bardzo mocno wykreowane przez władze, którym skończył się temat zagrożenia ze strony uchodźców. Wagnerowcy po prostu pojawili się jako nowa figura straszenia. Straszą efektywnie i powodują to, że następuje jakiś taki kolejny etap zniechęcenia turystów. Ludzie odwołują rezerwacje, ludzie pytają, czy mogą iść do lasu, na przykład właśnie, czy nie nastąpi jakiś atak.
Many people in the area say they're tired of the army presence, the noise and the constant checks, but are afraid to speak about it openly on camera, fearing of potential consequences. Some blame media's spin ahead of forthcoming elections for exacerbating the situation.
Na chwilę obecną mamy zbliżającą się kampanię wyborczą. I jak włączymy przekaz na TVN1, no to możemy zauważyć to, że tak, bezpieczne Podlasie, bardzo dużo policji, tysiące żołnierzy, żeby było bezpiecznie. Jak włączymy na TVN24 grupę Wagnera, niby szturmuje granicę wschodnią. Nic takiego tu nie ma miejsca.
Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Poland has increased its defense spending to 4% of its GDP, with the potential to reach 5% according to politicians' declaration. Thus, Poland has become one of the countries with the largest military investments in the entire NATO. Magdalena Hodownik for Euronews from Białowieża.
Waving Russian flags and chanting "Down with France," thousands of people staged a protest outside the French embassy in Niamey on Sunday in support of the junta that took over Niger earlier this week. Niger's former colonial ruler, France, has condemned the coup, with President Macron warning that he would not tolerate any threats to France and its interests. The French government has also suspended aid and security cooperation to Niger, demanding the return of ousted leader Mohamed Bazoum. The situation in Niger remains delicate, with some hostile to any foreign attempts to influence affairs.
I would like also to say to the European Union, African Union, and ECOWAS, please stay out of our business.
Meanwhile, the West African regional group ECOWAS has warned the junta to cede power within a week or face extreme sanctions and possible use of force.
The death toll from Sunday's suicide bombing at a political rally in northwest Pakistan has risen to 54. Nearly 200 people were wounded, including children. The attack was aimed at supporters of the Jamiat Ulema Islam Party, headed by hardline cleric Fazlur Rahman. No one has claimed responsibility, but police in Bajor district said their initial investigation points towards the Islamic State group operating across the border in Afghanistan.
The UK has announced that it will grant hundreds of new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea, ignoring calls from environmental campaigners and the United Nations to stop developing new fossil fuel projects. The country's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak justified the move by saying the UK will still need fossil fuels even after it reaches its net zero target, and that it's better to rely on domestic production of oil and natural gas rather than relying on other countries. He further justified the move on Twitter by pointing to the global consequences of Russia's war in Ukraine on the energy sector. The new plan also includes a pledge to invest £20 billion in carbon capture and storage projects, as Sunak maintains his country is still committed to its energy goals. The UK has pledged to reduce its net carbon emissions by 68% by the end of the decade and to reach net zero by 2050. But the government's climate advisors say the pace of the country's progress is worryingly slow. Inflation is down in the 20 countries that use the euro, dropping to 5.3% in July, its lowest rate since January 2022. The decrease from 5.5% the month earlier comes as the Eurozone economy has also increased modestly after months of stagnation, seeing a 0.3% growth in the April to June period compared to the beginning of the year. Although that increase was spurred on in part because of Ireland's growth of 3.3%, which may have distorted the overall picture, and without it, the zone would have only seen a modest 0.1% jump.
The EU is to relaunch negotiations with the Philippines on an ambitious free trade deal. Ursula von der Leyen made the announcement with President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in Manila. Trade talks with the bloc stalled under his predecessor.
Our teams will get to work right now on setting the right conditions so that we can get back to the negotiations. A free trade agreement has huge potential for both of us in terms of growth and in terms of jobs.
I welcome the conduct of this year of the scoping exercises between the European Commission and the Philippines towards negotiations for a Philippines-EU free trade agreement.
The two leaders also signed an agreement on promoting a greener economy in the Philippines. It comes under the EU's Team Europe initiative, which helps partner countries' infrastructure needs in fighting climate change. The focus in this case is on tackling plastic waste in the sea.
A British man has been freed by a Cypriot court after he was sentenced for killing his seriously ill wife. David Hunter was convicted of the manslaughter of 74-year-old Janice in an assisted suicide at their Paphos home in 2021. He was sentenced to 2 years in jail but has been freed after spending 19 months in custody awaiting trial. Hunter told the trial that his wife had cried and begged him to end her life as she suffered from blood cancer. He faced a charge of premeditated murder, but the court ruled that the prosecution could not prove there was premeditation in his actions. After decades of conflict, Armenia and Azerbaijan are engaged in delicate peace talks, brokered by the EU. The process involves talks with both Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev and Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. The two leaders sat down with Euronews' chief international correspondent, Annalise Borges, for global conversation.
Yeah, I think it is right thing to be hopeful. But if we see a constructive approach from Armenian side, and most important, if they totally put down all their aspirations to contest our territorial integrity, then we can find a peace solution very soon, maybe even by the end of the year.
While deep differences remain, Prime Minister Pashinyan acknowledges negotiators face a historic obligation to their people.
Կա թերևս մի բան, որը ուղղված է հավասարաբեր եւ Հայաստանի եւ Ադրբեջանի հանրությանը, որովհետեւ եւ Հայաստանի եւ Ադրբեջանի հանրությունները պետք է պահանջեն խաղաղություն իրենց իշխանություններից։ Դա պետք է ձևակերպի որպես հանրային պահանջ եւ խաղաղություն, ճկունություն եւ հմտություն այդ պահանջը իրականացնելու։
You can see the interviews in full on Global Conversation on Euronews TV and digital and on our affiliate channels from 7:30 p.m. Central European Time, Tuesday.
Italy's attempts to preserve and protect the historic city of Venice and its lagoon are insufficient and must be extended. That is according to UNESCO, which recommended the city is added to its list of endangered heritage sites on Monday. The UN organization blamed mass tourism, renovation projects, and climate change as the Italian city's main threats, as their combined forces are damaging buildings and urban areas and degrading the city's cultural and social identity.